Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with the Economic Impact of Black America. I'm your host, Ronald Bethea, and you know, join us on a regular basis. The slogan for this show is there's the positive change purchasing cooperative captures that power for your financial benefit. The positive change serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American owned renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically black colleges and universities to utilize black farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also to educate the African American community to address the effects of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio shows such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a scheduled guest for the show, but you know if you join us on a regular basis, the slogan for this show is there's power in numbers. If there's power in the positive change purchasing corporate LLC captures that power for your financial benefit. The positive change purchasing corporate LLC, we are broadcasting this evening over the World Wide Web, over the Positive Change online, digital, YouTube, radio, TV, podcast, radio network. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethea. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated earlier, we don't have a scheduled guest for today, but we're going to dig into our archives and our blog, and we think we have a very interesting subject matter that we will be bringing to you this evening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, many of you have been following me on this platform for a number of years, and you know as well as I know that this program is brought to you also by the National Association of Blacks in Solar and the Black Legends Foundation, BSLF HBCU Solar Radio Talk Show Initiative, which you can get more information on that initiative by logging onto our website at positivechangepc.com. That's the Radio Talk Show Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very interested in bringing you this show this evening because there are a number of things that's impacting our communities in terms of litigation that has been bought by uh, a number of organizations in the marketplace. And what we plan to do this evening, this show, ladies and gentlemen, is to sort of drill down on those initiatives that have been bought. So, and lawsuits that's been bought. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, uh, we have been looking at a number of patterns which have been forming by the Trump administration, and I think that this specific article sort of brings to focus what this subject matter that we'll be discussing with you this evening. And the title of this article was called Trump 2.0 Environmental Case School Board. Now, this was authored by Peter Alvarez and Marlon Lavelle. This was published on November the 4th, 2025, inside of an online news blog entitled Climate Inside Climate News. And the article leads off tracking federal lawsuits on climate change and environment action and policies in which the Trump administration is a part. We have added a, another segment to this because we have been looking at the impact of the CDFIs, which are Community Development Investment Fund through the U.S. Treasury Department. And many of you not aware of the CDFIs, which play a strategic role in bringing investment dollars and opportunities for business into our low and moderate income communities across the country. Now, article went on to say from the day he began his second term in January of 2025, the convicted felon, 34 counts, Donald Trump and his administration have embarked on an unprecedented effort to unpin the U.S. environmental protection law and policies to address climate crisis. But advocates and states that favor actions mounted an immediate counter offensive in the courts. Inside Climate News has been watching these cases as they've come forward. The process of the federal court cases, the Trump climate and environmental policy, both challenges to and case launched by his administration. Courts largely have reined in the environmental rollback of Trump's administration first administration, but the outcomes are less certain in his second term. Trump has appointed and hold 28% of federal judges, including 3 of the 9 that are sitting on the Supreme Court. Trump's appointees have embraced new legal doctrines that envisions his limited role for federal regulatory regulators. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking at here this evening on this platform, solar now and the future, his economic impact on it, is a number of cases that have been and initiatives that have been impacted. One of these uh, specific uh, issues has been the impact that this has had on the greenhouse gas initiative, which was part of the Invest in America agenda by the Biden Harris administration. And inside of that specific initiative, you had a uh, the Justice 40 initiative, which stated that 40% of all of the investment through the Invest in America agenda must benefit low to moderate income communities across this country. One of the specific initiatives under the Environmental Protection Agency has been the Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The Greenhouse Gas Initiative was awarded $27 billion in federal grants. 20 billion of that $27 billion was deposited with Citibank because there was a tremendous issue around the timeline of the proposals, the policies being set by the Biden-Harris administration, and them being able to get the money out the door to those various entities that had applied for these grants under the various federal agencies. So, what we're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, are cases that have been bought by states as well as the CDFIs and no- nonprofit organizations because we had the privilege of looking at this from a holistic standpoint of view, and it's very, very key that we look at the fact that the Trump administration has appointed 28% of all federal judges that are sitting on the federal bench, and how this impacts on these cases. Now, what we are specifically addressing is the fact that the outcomes of these cases. Now, this specific article says the outcome so far, which gives you a sample of some of the cases. This specific group looked at some 38 lawsuits which have been brought. You, and it identified that in the chart by showing in red the number of wins by the Trump administration on appeal, which was 6. 5 losses. You have what you call mixed, uh, which is this chart shows the state of play based on the latest substantive ruling. Wins for the Trump administration are shown in red. The losses are shown in blue. Mixed rulings were where the judge granted a motion in part and denied in part another part of that specific claim, which would be part of these lawsuits. And these rulings were called mixed. So you have 3 that are part of this chart. You have 24 cases where there has been no findings or rulings by the courts as of yet. Why is this important, ladies and gentlemen? This is very important because when we begin to look at the shutdown of the federal government on top of the defunding of many of the federal agencies as you begin to look at the impact on combating climate change. Now, we're going to look at some cases that have been brought by states. Specifically, we're going to look at some very important cases. Now, this case is entitled Saving Long Beach Island Inc. versus U.S. Department of Commerce. This deals with the restart of the Empire Wind and Anti-Wind Group Challenge. This was a win for it based on this. this was a loss for the Trump administration, and we apologize. We had to check that chart looking at the ruling. It was a red. It said it was a win for the Trump administration. Oh, okay, okay. Now the losses would have been of of another case. You're looking at the Revolution Wind versus Berman. Half of the Revolution went offshore of Rhode Island. This is uh, another case which is impacting the state of offshore wind in Rhode Island. But the specific case that we had a great deal of interest in has been CMV Norman, establishment of immigrant detention centers, Alligator Alley in Florida. Now, this specific challenge in this case made a made national news, and as we said, this was a in the court. Trump administration lost the case, but they won the case on appeal. Another important case is that we are sort of drilling down on this evening is the Climate United Fund versus Citibank, which is the dismantling of EPA Green Bank program and federal grants, which is what we are addressing this evening, ladies and gentlemen, because what we have come to understand in talking with numerous uh, entities around the country that this is impacting billions of dollars of federal dollars that have already been approved by Congress to be spent for these specific reasons to combat climate change. Some of these grants also dealt with environmental justice grants. Uh, I, in fact, took the time and I reached out to the Southern Environmental Law Center here in Washington, D.C., and we were able to speak with a Miss Attorney Sandra Taylor, who is a lawyer here in Washington, D.C., and we had a discussion on yesterday, and she indicated that they are representing uh, different nonprofits and entities, a total of 19 around environmental justice grants. So these matters are still in litigation, so she didn't go into a great deal of detail about this, but when we begin to start looking at these patterns, it's very, very clear that the Trump administration has has chose to ignore federal injunctions by circuit judges, federal judges, uh, and they have decided to claw back or withhold funding from these entities that have been vetted by the U.S. Department of Treasury under the as it relates to CDFIs. Now, $20 billion was supposed to go into funding green banks around the country. The Green Bank legislation was authored by Senator Van Hollen here of the state of Maryland. So we are very, very aware of the implications of these cases, and we're saying is why haven't there been any discussion about these issues other than what has come forth from of the House Minority Leader Jeffries from New York when he indicated that they were holding out and shed it because not just because of the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid and SNAP, which are all very important issues, but he brought up the fact that the Trump administration has continued to ignore that Congress has the power of the purse, and that when they approve funding for initiatives to be paid for by Congress, the Trump administration has refused to fund these organizations and force these states and entities to go into the federal courts in order to, to be made whole. And this is absolutely absurd because we're talking about combating climate change. And we're looking at the specific initiatives such as the Greenhouse Gas Initiative had a $7 billion initiative called the Solar for All program, which was started here in Washington, D.C. And that specific initiative, I personally did advocacy work here in the nation's capital and worked with a number of African American based firms that had played a major role in getting the Solar for All program, pilot program, started here going back to 2011. So, what we are looking at the fact that the Solar for All pilot was picked up by the Biden Harris administration, and $7 billion was put in that program, and it was supposed to benefit 900,000 low and moderate income residents across the country nationally. So, what we're looking at now, organizations such as the DC government under the Department of Energy and Environment was scheduled to receive some $62 million. State of Maryland was supposed to be receiving for the Solar for All initiative $62 million, which was to go through the Green Bank of Maryland, which is the, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which is the Green Bank in the state of Maryland. Totally here in the state of Maryland, the Maryland Clean Energy Center was supposed to be receiving $133 million in funding for various initiatives that they had applied for and won these these grants. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at articles that are relative to this. Now, as we were discussing the table earlier in our conversation, the table shows all the cases being tracked by, once again, the organization Climate News. This, those with the most recent decisions are at the top of the list. They are being, they are tracking these cases from the initial trial of the district courts through the Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court if they are heard there. The selection of cases draws heavily on the climate litigation database of the Sebastian Center for Climate Change and Law at the Columbia Law School. The list also included additional cases that did not address climate policy directs but raised relevant environmental justice and preservation issues. These include laws to block Trump administration's uh, setting of siting of immigrant detention camps in the Everglades. Now, readers can follow this information, but we're going to go back and look at our purpose of doing this show this evening. Let's look at an example here in the state of Maryland as we are talking about the litigation that has been bought in different states. Now, when we begin to look at that, the Attorney General here in the state of Anthony Brown's office here in the state of Maryland has bought litigation as it relates to the wind industry. And this is specific press release has just been recently um, put out by the office of the state attorney general here in Maryland files brief defending major offshore wind projects in Maryland against the Trump administration's challenge. This was published on October the 29th. This release went on to say $6 billion in economic benefits will create 13,000 jobs and generate enough electricity to power 700,000 homes in Maryland. This was put out by the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Maryland. And what it went on to share was the brief filed by the U.S. District Court, by the U.S. District Court in the U.S. District Court of Maryland, comes as the Trump administration has targeted wind energy projects across the country and offshore wind energy in particular. One of Maryland's most abundant and promising energy resources. If the federal government sees in delaying our determination for those wind projects, Maryland would lose critical economic, energy, and environmental benefits, which we went on, we cited earlier. Maryland has spent years building offshore wind for their offshore wind future, and to the Trump administration actions stretch the progress of thousands of jobs these projects could create, said Attorney General Anthony Brown. There have been many other lawsuits that have been brought by different entities as it relates to why this is so important. But what we're beginning to see as a pattern, ladies and gentlemen, in the actions of the uh, Trump administration is the fact that uh, we are looking at the fact that many of these cases are being these entities and organizations have to bring this litigation, and if they don't have the resources or have to get people to come to get these cases into the courts to fight this this the Trump administration over this the dismantling of these programs. We are looking at a very, 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 very difficult future for our young people as we begin to look at the fact that the the greenhouse gas initiative and a, a number of industries across the automobile industry, of course. Most of you are familiar with the EV charging industry. It has been impacted because the Trump administration has chosen to roll back the sunset dates for electric vehicles, which was originally scheduled to sunset December 31st of 2032. It has been rolled back to December 31st of 2025. Now, based on these projections, the automobile industry projects that they will lose $168 billion in profits because American consumers would be using these tax credits, the $7,500 tax credits for purchasing a new vehicle and $4,000 for purchasing a used vehicle. Most people are using this to get in the vehicle to be able to get out of the lot. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, when you're talking about taking away the 10% or down payment for in electric vehicles because the prices of the vehicles had not fallen to become more affordable because the breaking point for the automobile industry is for what we would call a vehicle that's is considered a low price vehicle is $30,000. And you don't have that many EVs that are being manufactured under that price point. So the automobile industry is caught between a rock and a hard place. This is one of the major sticking points between the short, so-called hot, what we would call a wedding arrangement made in hell between Musk with Tesla and the Trump administration, where he was in fact Trump had converted the the White House grounds and converted that into a auto showroom to try to get people to buy more Teslas because of the $100 million that Musk put up for Trump's election campaign. Now we know that that arrangement didn't last that long with what we would call okay. We know that that didn't last that very long. So what we have to do now is begin to look at the actual impact of where we are, where we want to be, and what we need to get done with in the midterms in 2026. We have to elect people who are willing to go to bat and fight to restore the investment tax credit for manufacturing, for renewable energy projects across which Biden had put into place. Matter of fact, the Biden Harris administration has raised $133 billion from foreign corporations, and they have already invested in U.S. And you have companies, South Korean corporations. We had approximately 38 corporations. Several of those corporations by name that you would recognize would be Hyundai, and you're looking at uh, Q, QCell. Oh, so, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have looked at the impact that the signing of the executive orders that Trump has taken place to rescind those investment tax credits in May alone of this year. It's $1.4 billion in construction projects for building plants here in the U.S. have been put on hold, which makes totally no sense if you're trying to create job opportunities and grow the economy. Now, as we indicated, there were 77 corporations. 22 of those corporations are Japanese, and the 39 Korean corporations, they have committed to invest 150 billion. The Japanese have invested, projected to invest 721 billion, and 8.1 billion uh, has been invested by a corporation by ITOC, ITOCH Corporation, $2 billion in North American renewable energy. Now, Canada has invested 21.5 billion in capital investment in green field renewable energy. Germany corporations 16, China corporations 13, India 6, Netherlands 8, Italy 4, Switzerland 4, Denmark 4, and there's 35 other corporations. I think that there were corporations that were originally started here in the U.S. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America, are looking at how and why these lawsuits had to be brought to the federal courts in the first place. Because without the investment tax credits that Biden had put in place, which Trump has signed executive orders rescinding those those investment tax credits, was the reason why these corporations invested in the country in the first place. So it seems that there seems to be a permanent issue with the character we have down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He can't seem to be able to get over the Obama or the Biden administration. He's been in office a full year now, and we have had the second longest federal shutdown in history, which the first longest shutdown took place under his administration. So this is what we're working with. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to speak here on this program truth to power, because as the minority leader, Jeffries from the House, indicated that they could not trust the GOP to follow through with any of their promises. So when he was asked what how did he feel about the defection of the 8 Democratic senators who, in fact, had decided to break ranks and sign on to a promise which does not guarantee people anything. And if not, as it relates to the Affordable Care Act. But what about all of these other issues as it relates to combating climate change and billions of dollars in play in the economy as it relates to the wind, solar, and geothermal and battery storage industry? These are the issues that are at stake, ladies and gentlemen. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to sort of get off of our soapbox, and we're going to close out this show this evening because we wanted to make sure we got this show in, and we're going to uh, uh, get this out to the public because our people in the African American community have to realize that we are being impacted by this unholy alliance between the fossil fuel industry and the tech industry. And that was made very, very clear in an article that uh, we have been able to look at which what what is going on as currently. There was a very, very interesting article in that we looked at as it relates to uh, last month, which was our archives. If you go to our news and events tab, you want to click on our October archives, and you want to scroll down to a article that will say uh, is that September, October? That must be September. So we'll go into September because we want to provide that information before we close out today. This specific article says uh, that they have the receipts to show the impact that the data centers are having on the how this is playing out as it relates to the the, the tech industry because they're being powered by gas turbine technology. So they're having to retrofit outdated coal plants, and many of these are being bought back online to be retrofitted with gas turbines, and they're using natural gas to. And this is the specific article that I was looking for as I was basically talking. Data centers are already increasing your energy bills, and we have the receipts. Now, this specific article was written by Mike Jacobs in Evergreen Action, and this article went on to say it was posted September 29th of this year in Evergreen Action, which is another online blog that we uh, think does an outstanding job in providing updated, dated weekly articles. And they went on to say the Union of Concerned Scientists, the wealthiest companies are building extraordinary expensive data centers that you and I are subsidizing. A new analysis from the Union of Concerned Scientists revealed that electric utilities across the PJM region are forcing consumers to pay billions to connect big tech massive data centers to the grid. Households in 7 states, including Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, were on the hook for 4.3 billion in 24 alone. Utilities are taking advantage of outdated rules to pass these costs on to ratepayers instead of charging the companies actually driving for the demand. And the system is working as exactly as it was designed, protecting the monopoly utilities, generators, and tech giants while sticking families with the bill. If the PJM regulators are serious about affordability, they must end this cost shifting scheme and require big tech to pay their fair share. Now, there are some very, very key takeaways in this, and we're going to share those key takeaways. Now, electric bills are going up around the country, and some of these increases are due to outdated practices that require consumers to pay billions for tech giants' grid connection. Number two, their analysis tallies 4.3 billion in cash cost in 24 7 states. Those states were Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. Number three, data centers built recently have the electricity demand of small cities. New proposals in data centers campuses that power demand comparable to the total power plants in small states. Four, through a review of planning documents across the states and grid operators, the PJM found 133 examples of electric utilities connecting data centers to the grid with very inexpensive or new lines while passing the cost on to consumers and roads. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be able to go to our news and events and click on our September archive link, and you'll be able to find this specific article. But some things that I'd like to share with you, as I indicated, to talk about why this litigation was brought, is because in December of 2023, Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania brought a lawsuit uh, uh, the Federal Regulatory Commission here in Washington, D.C. At that time, it was headed by a gentleman who happens to be African American, who was a very dear associate of mine, Mr. Willie Phillips, who was former head of the D.C. Public Service Commission, was picked by Biden to be the first African American to head the Federal Regulatory Commission. He, in fact, saw and resolved this litigation before July of 2024, which was calling for an 800% rate hike for the PJM. The PJM, as I indicated, is comprised of 13 states in the District of Columbia with 65 million customers. Let me give you the backdrop of how this applies. In 2024, while the election campaign was still going on, Trump called a meeting. This was reported by Politico, which many of you are familiar with. Politico indicated that Trump had a meeting with the fossil fuel industry and the tech industry and said, if you put up $1 billion for my campaign to get me elected for president, you can do what you want to do. Well, we know because campaign finance laws, Trump says a lot of things, but he just couldn't do that. But because of the PACs and the way that campaigns have been set up today, we know that billions of dollars of dark money flows into these campaigns through the process of politics. Okay, now going back to how this impacts upon the 65 million customers in the PJM, in 2023, consumers were paying $34.17 for a megawatt day. This is how the wholesale rate was price was in 2023. And a after the unsuccessful 800% rate hike the utilities came back and filed for another rate increase, which was a 689% rate hike because the cost in 2024 jumped from $34.17 to $269.92. Now, which breaks down, it went from $34.17. When you multiply that times 65 million customers, that's 2.2 billion for 2023. After the rate hike, highest in the PJM's history, it jumped to $269.92, which represents $14.7 billion. This represents the highest in the history. Now, in 2025, based on the previous litigation, there was supposed to be a cap of $325 as the highest that the daily rate could go. In 25, you got another 22% rate increase on top of the 686% rate hike. So it came in over $333 for a megawatt day. Now, this was passed on to us in the 13 states and the District of Columbia, which represents some 65 million customers. Now you know why your electricity bill is so damn high. It does not have anything to do with how much energy that you're using, but we are paying for the infrastructure and the grid connections for these data centers, which is being led by the increased demand for artificial intelligence, crypto mining, and blockchain technology, which are the primary driving force of the proliferation of data centers across this country and around the world. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we wanted to sort of tie this in a bow. What does this mean? It means that we're being squeezed on both ends, and without this litigation that has been bought by federal against the federal government, without the litigation being brought by the state as well as private entities. So it's important for people to know the status of these lawsuits. And this is what we are working with, and this is what we're dealing with. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another exciting edition of Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, till next week, we want to say go in peace as we close another exciting edition of Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Now, we don't want you to meet us back here. We want you to beat us back here as we close once again of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Yeah. Well, until next week, ladies and gentlemen, as we always say, we want you to go. We want you to go in peace as we close another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. So until next week, we say